So we acknowledge that the land on which we occupy or sitting today, the occupied territory of over 100 tribes, Lisa and Maidu within the Placer County area. This land has been stewarded by indigenous people since time immemorial. We acknowledge the critical importance of the land and water to the indigenous people of California today, and that the existence of tribal communities and preservation of traditional indigenous way of life depend on secure and permanent land bases and the right of self-determination.
So what is the California Creative Corps? It's an economic and workforce recovery pilot program intended to fuel positivity, regain public trust, and inspire health and safety across California's diverse populations. But one of the things that the Arts Council was able to share that we couldn't possibly have known about their fire history is that the most recent fires in the Klamath region forced 90% of the BIPOC communities living in the forested area that was devastated out of the county. That's a huge deal. It's displacement, it's climate refugee conversations. These things lend themselves to incredible projects that relate to narrative and story. Whatever kind of artist you are, whether you're a visual artist, a digital artist, a filmmaker, a musician, theatre, there's a role to play in telling these stories.
Well, and we haven't even hit possibly the most catastrophic part of all this also is we're still coming into the rainy season and the watersheds are incredibly fragile, and if we have mudslides and everything else, it's another devastation to the communities.
California Arts Council have said that there are particular things that are of interest, all of them placing the artist at the forefront of issues that are critical to society. So let's create public awareness related to water and energy conservation, climate mitigation, emergency preparedness, relief and recovery, and civic engagement, social justice and community engagement, and public health awareness. Of course, there are many ways of looking at the upstate region. And then, of course, we've looked at the tribal lands. Tribal lands have no relationship to county lines. They came first. So when we're looking at projects to fund, arts projects to fund, we might want to think beyond county lines, and maybe we create discretionary funds that can serve regional needs.
The relationships of different areas aren't so much determined always on county lines. Of course, it's also determined about water and how water flows. And so the map is really just showing if the drop of rain fell, what watershed area would it drain out. So anything in the green eventually goes out towards the ocean. The yellow zones is this massive region that drains out through the Sacramento River, which Placer County is obviously part of. And then the reddish orange is goes out into the Great Basin. But it's definitely been confirmed as we've gone through, and now we're at county number 16, that these are really important relationships. And even some of these counties, have a lot of their water leaving their entire basin to go into another area. And so looking at how we all relate to each other and work with each other, what are the opportunities around water?
Another big deal, which we're so grateful to the California Healthy Places Index for, is that it shares very clearly the correlation between race and ethnicity and healthy outcomes for communities. We know this already anecdotally, but we encourage you, when you're putting together your project applications, please show an awareness for what you're receiving in terms of the data around race and ethnicity into your applications. We really encourage that. It's very clear that overall Placer County has a high population of Hispanic and Latino.
The track 201.07, which is by Kings Beach and Brockway, that's one that actually has the lowest overall score, with some specific areas that have been identified here. And then the other next lowest one is by Roseville area near the Timber Creek Golf Course. And so I don't know which one you would like her to look at first, but I suggest starting with one thing.
There it is, that tiny sliver right beneath an area of affluence and positive, healthy outcomes. So what you do is you click on these areas, and then on the left-hand side, will be a panel called Community Conditions. And there you get your analysis. And you can see it's right down there in the lowest quartile of the Healthy Places Index. 33% Hispanic. That's significant. Is that a project? You know what I mean? How can we lend voice to work with our Latinx community out there, et cetera, et cetera. I was on a call this morning with California Arts Council. It's an endemic throughout California, housing. It's absolutely, the housing thing is extreme. I think I'd be so happy if I saw lots of applications that connected with, artists with housing, whether it's housing for artists or how artists are shining a light on possible solutions for housing issues. A great way of finding the why for your narrative sections of a proposal is by looking at the policy action areas in the Healthy Places Index. But they're also here, like if you burrow down, it'll share with you what's the connection to health of low-income homeowners, severe housing cost burden. All residents should be able to afford adequate housing without giving up healthy food, medical care, or other necessities, or accepting unsafe housing conditions. And this is where another clue for artists. Artists might feel passionately and have amazing technical capacity to create public awareness and vision, but they may need a little help from a social service organization or a unit of government that's actually working in some of those areas. Does that make sense? And then together, putting their heads together, that can lend the artist or the artist collaborative capacity to drive those messages. Does that make sense? So all these are clues for you. And can you explain how high school enrollment, Katrina, compares in this tract with the rest of the state?
Yeah, I mean, there's your numbers looking at it. I mean, it's the 0.1 percentile. That means that 99.9% of tracts in California have a higher score for this indice, the percent of 15 to 17-year-olds in school.
I do feel like we had talked about before that it's a bit of a red herring.
Yes.
Because the population up there is, most people are not full-time residents. There's so many houses that are
secondary residences.
Secondary residents, yeah, they may not have a family or a community in the same sense that other parts of California do.
Great. So you've done exactly what I asked you to do at the beginning. You've challenged the data. Because we could be getting ourselves really worked up and simultaneously excited about creating a project around this, only to find out, well, there's actually a reason. It's because of the huge number of second homeowners. If you're sure about that, that's great. But if you feel like it's a clue to go deeper with something,
Well,
that's great too.
I think going deeper with this, you want to look at that Hispanic population, because those are the people who serve the restaurants and resorts.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the issue is for housing.
So perhaps housing and less education. This is great. This is why we do these listening sessions. If you can use your non-linear thinking and apply all the scale and relativity to this data with all the local knowledge you have, then by all means make a case. So you're in Placer, you're going to need to be creative.
Yeah.
My guess is that you might do well on these more regional approaches, going back to things like fire, air, relationship of that to watersheds and forest health, and look at some of those more sort of global approaches together. I think some really exciting stuff could come from it.
Is within Placer County. To me, the key is going to be not necessarily focusing on those areas that were not dark blue and blue, but the other areas, drilling down within those areas to identify ethnicities, marginal communities. Because I know Placer has Placer County youth. There is a contingency of foster youth who are in need of services, and I believe we do have a location, Koinonia up in Lewis.
Yes.
That to me presents a great opportunity to having a project around art, especially if we can find some way to have brainstorming now. Those foster kids express their emotions by way of art and see about helping. So I do believe in Placer County, the opportunities are there. I like the indexes and indices. The work is really going to be to drill down, because it's those communities who, while there may be a high concentration of access to education and medical services, health services, if we drill down, it is going to be those who are not part of the dominant group who will need the assistance.
But wouldn't it make more sense, bearing in mind that we're looking at really serious issues that are critical to society and health and all the things that go into community well-being, to look more, to align ourselves more with, apportioning funds according to the density of blue area tracts? And that's where we suddenly realize that actually a regional approach would be just as sensible. So I love the micro piece as well. Like, I think some really good projects can come from that kind of micro analysis of race and the correlation between healthy outcomes, but also be thinking regional as well. And you're going to have to be creative. I certainly welcome that. Did anything come to mind when we were talking about potential projects, however loosely defined?
A lot of artists are not very comfortable in life. If they're working artists and not retirees, but even those retirees. So housing for artists is a big, big thing. I know so many artists on my Facebook page who cannot find affordable housing. I mean, apartments they can afford, and they are working artists, and they're moving out of our community to other communities so they can afford to live and make their art. So that was one of the things that just kind of spoke to me, that it would be nice to have them, because every community is working on low-income housing, that perhaps this would be a work-live type of situation that we could think about. I know it's a big project, but it was just a thought.
Maybe bearing in mind this whole thing, the California Creative Corps is a pilot program, and the idea is that we show the state what works for us, and then the state says, okay, let's make this permanent.
I think access to arts education is a big hole to be filled too. Here at Blue Line Arts, we've been doing field trip tours with grant funding. We've made that completely free for Title I schools to come in. And every single time we are surveying the teachers, asking them, what type of arts integration, if any, is being done in the schools. Elementary schools, especially in this area, there is no designated arts teacher. There's only a volunteer-run art docent program that they depend on. But if the parents are all working, then it's not being done. So I'm thinking, some type of artist in schools program, if we're able to train the artists to be those art teachers, that could be a part-time job where they can have more reliable income while also, doing their work.
I'm so glad that you brought this up, and this has come up many times, the desperate need for arts education. And of course, you all know that Prop 28 passed,
Yes.
which is unbelievable. Like, it's a generational shift. You don't want to ask for monies from this program that are offered through some other grant program already, but that isn't to say you can't get really creative and what does intergenerational learning mean?
So some things that we've been starting to work on that I'd like to see kind of flourish into the full capacity is I have a small history class that we're looking at just the different music and art from civil rights movements, anyone who's been kind of, held back in society, and they're going to be also creating their own artistic responses to today's world and what people are going through. We're also we work in the juvenile hall once a week with young people, and we're working on building a music studio to kind of help with some anti-recidivism, because that's kind of the draw of the Hip Hop Congress. A lot of the kids want to be rappers or DJs or musicians of some sort.
I'm challenging you, Hip Hop Congress, to be thinking outside the kinds of work that California Arts Council provides funding for in other programs. I love what you do. It's so obvious that the community values you. And now be thinking, okay, how can we connect it? How can we think out of the box with it?
I'd personally love to see more documentaries. The documentary that the Auburn State Theater did, or the Auburn Symphony did, it was also on KBIE. That 26-minute and I think it's like 30-second video is perfect for getting national attention on the public stations. So, I mean, I'm a big proponent, as we all know, on social media, which is what I'm mostly in charge of. Video is king, so if we can help to support the documentaries that help our BIPOCs and the indigenous and our underserved communities, those are stories that need to be told.